companies that are members. They're all for-profit, but the association, the consortium, is a not-for-profit. And we're working on R&D for customer interaction, research and development for customer interaction. So we're looking at new and different ways to support customers. We've very quickly realized that that means you have to have new and different ways to support employees who support customers. There's a very definite chain reaction there. So a little context around the consortium world. It's companies like Oracle, Cisco, Dell, HP, Microsoft, Novell, Intuit, Yahoo, a couple of banks whose internal IT support departments are members, but we're mostly in the space of high-tech customer support. What we do is we get people together and we facilitate discussions, not unlike this. Jerry's been a long-time friend and mentor in some ways in terms of how we do our work. And through a process of collective thinking and collective experience, we come up with new and different ways to attack the problems that companies are having. We often get the feeling that we're swimming upstream. I think it's to your point, companies don't change unless there's a crisis. We are very much trying to push opportunity-based change, which is questionable as to whether or not that's even a feasible thing to be doing. There are occasional points of success.
Define that. What is opportunity-based change?
Well, so here's a better way to do this. Even though you think you're doing fine now, you're not in pain, you're not at risk of failure, but you should, it's like if it ain't break it.
If it ain't broke.
If it ain't broke, break it. Yeah.
Don't fix it.
Kind of a thing. So our observation is people are much more, organizations in particular are much more, I think it's true at the individual level, willing to change in the face of crisis. Unfortunately, because there's opportunity bound. So we've
First, you should hire somebody to sabotage that, so that you can step in to rescue.
Well, yeah,
I think they're doing that themselves, right?
We try to create some of that. So we rely a lot on, there's about a dozen deep thinkers who we follow pretty closely on the academic side. Shoshana Zuboff, great fans of Hegel and Brown, which was already mentioned. Peter Singhi, Gary Hamel, if you haven't seen The Future of Management by Gary Hamel, very relevant to this whole conversation in terms of new ways of thinking about management and organization. Actually, he sort of says we don't need managers, we need leaders. Gosh, there's a whole bunch of others that a lot of our themes in academic work come from. So we try and tie that to the operational reality of managers and executives in support organizations who are trying to improve customer loyalty, improve their products based on customer experience, which frankly most companies don't do. And so very early on, through this process, working with these high-tech companies and customer support organizations, it was clear that if they could capture, structure, and reuse the experience of supporting a customer, they could better support that customer in the next conversation. They could better support other customers in similar situations, and they could identify product improvements that would, in fact, through root cause analysis, remove the cause of that disruption to the customer in the first place. So what we're proposing is that a network is a more effective structure, so long as, and it's better for certain people and better for certain work. And the deep principle here in terms of the nature of the work, I think, is whether or not it's predetermined or deterministic or non-deterministic, right? So if you're building toasters, you know what you want as output, you know the resources you need to create toasters, and a fairly predictable approach, linear manufacturing process for that might work. If you're solving a customer's problem, you don't know what resources you're going to need to solve the problem. You don't know how long it's going to take or what is the best approach to do this. And we find a swarming model, not a linear model. So what most organizations in support do, and many of you have been victims of this, is the level 1, level 2, level 3, right? Talk to level 1, oh, I'm going to escalate you to level 2. Oh, well, you can't, that's good news, bad news, right? So I'm not talking to this person, that's good news. But now I'm going to have to explain this all over again to the next person, should we ever get in touch.
Yeah.
When you get escalated, it's always a callback. That is a very linear manufacturing approach to support. And we're applying something that emerged over the past 100 years in a very deterministic environment, where you know the outcome and you know the resources, to something that's very non-deterministic. The other deep principle, so that's one factor. Is the work something that requires creativity, has lots of ambiguity, somebody used that word yesterday, or is it something where you know the outcome, accounts payable, you know what you want to have happen there. Process is probably a good thing, a little bit of hierarchy is probably a good thing. Solving customer problems, that's best done, and support agents and support organizations swarm independent and in spite of how they're measured, the organizations they put in, the job descriptions that are forced upon them, the silos that they're created, and the tiers of support. They often do the right thing in spite of the infrastructure. So we're saying, what if we enable the idea of collaboration, or we call it intelligence swarming, such that the situation defines who should be working on it. We need to know a lot about the players. So the profiles, identity, reputation. We love some of the stuff the gaming community, we talked about this last night at dinner. The gaming community is doing around reputation and identity. Because every interaction should be an opportunity to improve the value and the relevance of the next interaction. We tend not to learn from every interaction. But how many of you called support and they knew who you were and knew about the last time you called? And every call to customer service.
I have had that experience at the Apple Store.
Oh my
The
gosh.
New York thing.
Yeah, wow. Was it the same person or was there some systemic?
No, it was
thing
the
functioning?
same person.
So
It was.
Wow.
So can we replicate that and make it scalable when it isn't the same person? That's the goal. That's how we're viewing capturing the collective experience. Okay. So the other deep principle. Now you know why I wanted to know about the break. The other deep principle. So this deterministic, non-deterministic thing. I think we need to be conscious of that. The nature of the word. The other thing is this principle of abundance versus scarcity.
Wait,
So,
I'm sorry, just point of clarification. I don't fully understand what the swarming thing was. Or did you explain it, but you didn't define it as swarming? I'm confused.
I didn't. Obviously, I should explain it very well if I did. You know, so in the traditional support model, it's a linear streaming.
Right.
One person handles a problem, they can't solve it, they pass it to the next person, they start all over again.
Okay.
And there's very little collaboration. It happens under the covers through FWS and stuff like that, because the people are doing the right thing, not because the organization is set up to support them in solving a problem. Swarming says, I got a problem, actually, it's an opt-in model. I have visibility to all the work that's relevant to me, and I choose to help. It requires that people have a passion about, so one of our views is support success, outstanding support experience is about passion, not process. People are aligned with, alignment is huge. I think we've touched on that a little bit. And if they're aligned with the purpose, and they have visibility to the work to which they are relevant, they do help. Especially people who are in support, that's why they're there. They enjoy solving problems and helping. So you might get a situation, one person knows the answer, they solve it. Another situation, 3 or 4 people see it, jump in, it's swarm. They do it with a high degree of relevance. That's where intelligence swarming comes in as the modifier of swarming. So swarming is working in parallel and in a collaborative model, rather than working in a linear streaming escalation model. Does that help?
Yep.
So swarming does require people understand what is it that motivates people. And so the top 4, they're all emotional, is a sense of accomplishment, recognition, not in the form of any tangible way. So sense of accomplishment is how I feel about what I'm doing. I feel good about what I'm doing. That's a huge motivator. Other people acknowledging what I've done, that's a huge motivator. Interesting work, autonomy, and growth. Well, so I think that you can't have those without a sense of purpose. So Drucker coined the term, when talking about knowledge, Drucker was very prolific, right? Lots and lots of stuff. One of the terms he coined in the 50s was the knowledge worker. And all knowledge workers are volunteers. Now we're talking about swarming, problem solving, where we want people to volunteer. You only volunteer for what you care about. So if you don't have a sense of purpose or alignment, this is why alignment we think is one of the fundamental tenets or principles of the new structure. If you don't care about what the organization's doing in terms of their compelling purpose, their intent, if you don't have a sense of purpose about it, you can never feel a sense of accomplishment. Those two are mutually exclusive. So it's not about coffee cups, t-shirts, and plaques, which all of our do. way overdue, right, in terms of incentives. The incentives are inherent in the leadership effectiveness, which is creating an environment where people feel a sense of connectedness, a sense of purpose about what the organization is trying to do. And if they feel that, if leadership is successful in creating that, then the motivators are inherent in the work itself, which I think it's an interesting question, dramatically different from anybody else in their marketplace. And there's some great examples. Gary Hamel profiles a bunch of them. Whole Foods, the employees hire and fire each other. Gore-Tex, there is no titles. There are no titles. If you call a meeting and people show up, you might be a leader for that particular topic.
Google internally?
Google, the 20% work on what developers get time to work on their passion.
But also the way they actually sort of movie studio style form up around projects. You have to recruit people to your project.
Well, that's an agile software principle, isn't it? Is it explicitly agile software process? Different? Okay, so is it deterministic or non-deterministic? Do we know the outcome, or is it something we need creativity for? That's one thing we need to think about in how we approach the structure or the practices. Is it something that will operate on a basis of scarcity, or is it something that operates on the basis of abundance? Most everything that I deal with in customer support organizations is operating on a principle of abundance. And so a network is better at that. Swarming is better than streaming. The value should be assessed by those who realize the value, not by managers who are not even part of the process. The idea of managers doing performance assessments is a ridiculous notion. Payment based on a bell curve distribution of people's is pay for mediocrity, not pay for performance. So these are some of the provocative assertions we use to just kind of spark the conversation. But I do think there are little points of light. Cisco just introduced, based on some of this work, they're really trying to promote collaboration. Just introduced job descriptions that are like, you have majors and minors. So companies, every company I work with says, hire the best and brightest, and then we put them in a little box. They don't say this last part, I say this part. The box is a job description, and 1,000 other people fit. It has nothing to do with their true scope of skills and capabilities, which is something like this, but they're in a box like this. Then we put them in a structure that's like level 1, you get 20 minutes. If you can't tell for 20 minutes, it doesn't matter how good you are, what you might know. So what if job descriptions were unique to the individual based on their unique set of skills and capabilities and perspectives and their past history of value creation? So this is huge for HR communities, right? Oh, we have to have job descriptions, pay level points. Oh my God. Bell curve, oh, you're kidding. This is this is, what do you call it? Anyway, crazy. So we're challenging a lot of these traditional practices and systems in a new way to think about job descriptions. I pick my majors and I pick my minors, just like you pick a college curriculum. So every employee now essentially can tailor their job description to the things they're best at doing. How good are people when they're doing what they're best at doing versus people doing what they're told to do? What's the difference there? You know, to create spiky performance is huge. People's autonomy, a sense of I opt in rather than I'm told I have to do this work. So all of this is leading us to believe the network is a better structure, especially for customer support. And that it really challenges some underlying organizational principles. The power of alignment, gets back to the sense of purpose. Transparency, people have a view of things especially based on relevance. And interaction, or interactors, we could say. The power of collaboration and interaction, that's how knowledge is created. And that those three principles, regardless of what structures you use, are way better, at least for customer interaction, customer support kinds of things.
Cool. So thank you.
Jared, I have a question.
Yes.
Where are those two people from the Netherlands who this is